I'm Ian Mullen. I'm here as co-chair of the Pride Network, which is a network of government employees. Welcome to the Pride Network's adjusted flag raising. I know this is different than normal. Welcome to those of you online. Welcome Premier McNeil, Minister Ince, Public Service Commissioner Langley. I'd also like to thank Vice Chair of Halifax Pride, Jess Smith, for being here, who provided us with the new flag this year. Corey Alders, who put so much work into this day. I'm really proud to be here during what is National Indigenous Heritage Month on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, covered by treaties of peace and friendship with the Mi'kmaq peoples. June is also recognized as Pride Month because it falls on the anniversaries of the decriminalization of homosexual acts between consenting adults in Canada in 1969, and the Stonewall Uprising the same year, where in the face of injustice from the police in New York City, the gay community rose up in a series of events that feels incredibly familiar to our current moment. In the 1980s and 90s, a pandemic ripped through the 2S LGBTIQ+ community around the world in a story which also feels incredibly familiar right now. And today's also my wedding anniversary. And my wonderful husband, Josh, is at home planting a tree, a dogwood, that we're hoping we get lots of flowers from. And in preparing for this day, where so often we celebrate how far we've come, I think many of us are watching TV and reading the news and realizing how far we have to go. I have a husband and rights I didn't think were possible when I grew up and realized I was gay. I feel supported and welcomed by the government I serve. But I'm also cis, white, able-bodied, and gender-conforming, and our community is so much more than that. Today I invited trans educator and activist Chris Cochrane to speak for those in our community who, despite hard-won victories, still feel left behind and excluded. Because I know that representation matters, visibility matters, and Black lives matter. And like that tree my husband is planting, let's hope this blooms. So with that, I welcome you, and I welcome Premier McNeil, who will speak next on behalf of government.
Thank you, Ian, and congratulations. Give Josh our best as well. I hope that tree does grow and bloom, and we're thrilled that you're part of our public service and that you in this province get to be able to express who you love, how you want to love them, and you can do it in an open way in Nova Scotia, and I'm really proud to be a colleague of yours here in the province of Nova Scotia. I also want to recognize those of you that are at home. As Ian said, this is very different than last year. Remember last year, I think we even had donuts. But you know what? This is a new reality for us. But it is one that will not stop us or will not deny us the ability for us to celebrate and to be proud of the fact that in this province you can be who you want to be, you can love who you want to be, and we know there's still more work to do though. And that's why it's so important that we celebrate Pride Week, and I want to acknowledge the Pride Network throughout government. You are really leading by example. This is a tremendous organization of 10,000 plus people, and the fact that you're probably one of the largest workplaces in this province, and that you make it so inclusive and so loving and so caring and working with each other and supporting each other. It's a tremendous example, not only for our other workplaces, but quite frankly for the broader community and beyond. So for me to be part of that and be here with you is a real honor for me, and I want to thank you for letting me be part of that. As Ian said, this has been a challenging time. It does seem familiar when you look back at our history at times. This has been a challenging time for our province, our country, and really the globe as we struggle with this pandemic. But it's also been a challenging times when we look at what's happening by video in the U.S., Black lives do matter, and the way people are treated at the hands of law enforcement in this province, and quite frankly, the systemic racism that is rooted in parts of the world. But I want to be very clear about this. Nova Scotia is not immune, and we can all say that we are an inclusive community, but let's be real about this. Systemic racism exists in the important institutions in our province, and it requires all of our voices to make sure that we call it out. We acknowledge what it is, because in order to begin the healing, quite frankly, and the starting of our journey forward, it has to be from a point of acknowledgement that our ancestors, quite frankly, did not always set the path in the direction it should be. They did not always have actions that we should be emulating. I'm very proud of my heritage and my family. But at some point in the history of this province, systemic racism was rooted in the institutions that matter. We need to call it out. And there's no better time, in my view, than now. When I started my journey as the Premier of this province, I worked really hard. I had this kind of vision that I wanted every Nova Scotian to see themselves in our institutions. No matter who you were, who you loved, where you came from, what your heritage was, I needed to be able to, my hope was that you would see yourself reflected in what we do as a province. Because it's critical, because if you never see somebody like you, or someone who worships like you, loves like you, looks like you, ancestral heritage like you, doing something, you can never aspire to do it. And that should be our goal in the public service, to ensure that everyone in this province sees themselves in it. Because we have a tremendous opportunity to lead by example. We've made great strides, but we have a lot of work to do as a community. And I want to say this to you, we don't need the world, we don't need to wait for the world. We don't need to wait for the federal government of Canada. We don't need to wait for a neighboring community. We have ourselves. We can lead this journey. The United Nations came into our province to celebrate the decade of the African descent. The United Nations came to this province on the east coast of Canada, the only place in North America they've come to recognize the work and the journey that we're on. Even though we're at the beginning of it, the United Nations came here to help us celebrate and kick off, count us in. We didn't have to wait for the national government to come with us. We didn't have to wait for the US government to come with us. We did that collectively as a community because we care, we love, and we support one another, and we recognize, quite frankly, that we are better together. That we are better embracing each of our differences and celebrating them to make our collective. And I will say this to you, it is not good enough just to add our words to that table anymore. My children are demanding action, not for their future, but for the future of their friends. Our children across this province, regardless of who they love, who they're born to, their socioeconomic circumstances, are telling us now is the time. And there is no better time than now for our province to continue on the movement, to make this province the inclusive province it has to be. The most heartbreaking thing for me to read in the last number of weeks was when a mother having to explain to her children, whose father is African Nova Scotian, that they had to turn and look to a police officer and explain the reason they were being stopped was because of the color of the skin of their father. That's not good enough for a province that we want to live in, and it's not good enough, quite frankly, for the future that I want for my children, my grandchildren, or your children or grandchildren. And if we want to continue to embrace people like the United Nations on the journey we're on, we have to make sure that we stand up in good public policy, in good acknowledgement, and saying words matter, but quite frankly, actions matter the most. And we as a community need to continue to lead that. You need to continue to pressure your employer. Our children need to speak up. And every one of us, regardless of our position in life, regardless of our gender, regardless of our socioeconomic circumstances, need to demand better of our system and our institutions. And I believe we can do it. And here in Pride Week, to be able to be here this year to help celebrate the leadership of the network who actually made sure that this pride flag not only represented gender equality and who we can love, but made sure that we were looking after the trans community, and black community, and indigenous community, and people of color. What better way to start our Pride Week than to be able to raise a flag that reflects the great qualities of our province, and that is all of our people being represented in one flag. Congratulations, and thank you for giving me the honor to be with you and to help lead you. And I hope in our collective journey, however long that is, that we continue to make this employment and this province a more loving and inclusive community.
Thank you so much, Premier. I'm going to welcome up Minister Ince to say a few words now.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are in, as you've heard for months, some really challenging times. The 2S LGBTQ plus community has fought to be recognized, to be heard, to be accepted. Within that group, there are people from my community who have had some gains, movement forward, but not enough. We talk about how we're going to move forward. We talk about how we've had in the past some great advancements and changes. Yes, there have been, but there has to be a lot more. As the Premier has said, we began this journey in 2013, actually before 2013, having these discussions that are being discussed internationally. It is very difficult for me to stand here today and try to say to you that we have come a great distance and we have a lot more to do. But in reality, when the Premier talked about a young mother talking and explaining to her children what they have to expect when they walk out in society, I remember having those conversations with my young son and preparing him for how he should be conducting himself as he walks outside. Folks, that's not the way our children should be raised. Our children should have the opportunity to have fun, be themselves, explore, grow, make mistakes without having the burden of worrying about how somebody is going to perceive you based on the color of your skin. It's the skin I've been in all my life. I've had a lot of great allies, and I'm going to tell you, I am optimistic, even though I may sound a little bit down. I'm very optimistic because when you look and you look at the crowds, you look at who is stepping up. Thank you. Thank you to all humans for stepping up and realizing that this is a human crisis and not a color crisis. It's a human crisis, folks. We've got to start treating each other like humans. Thank you. Have a great day. Happy Pride. Celebrate it with all your glory. Celebrate it with all your pride. And as the Premier said, it takes all of us. Please, don't stand by anymore. Do something. You know the difference between right and wrong.
Thank you, Minister Ince. I'm going to welcome up Laura Lee Langley with the Public Service Commission. She has been the champion for the Pride Network ever since I got my start here in government, frankly. So I've known her for quite a while. She's going to come up and say a few words as well.
Thank you, Ian. I'm not as smooth as the speakers that have gone before me. I actually have some notes that I'm going to refer to today. I just want to say in the last couple of months, and we've all talked about this, there's really been a seismic shift in the world. And for many of us, it really has provoked some reflection on what is really important, what really matters in our lives. For me, it has affirmed just how important our relationships are, how we relate to one another, how we come together to understand and support one another, and just how fragile and fleeting life can be, and how necessary and important it is for us to respect and give some space for one another to be who we are. Pride speaks to this, and it opens the space for those conversations, the teaching and the understanding about acceptance and inclusion and love, no matter how it is conceived. The varied lived experiences in the Pride community intersect not just sexuality and gender identity, but also class, privilege, race, ability, ethnicity, and culture. And the story of the 2S LGBTIQ+ community is being written. And as the acronym expands to include more letters, we must take pride in all of the individuals that those letters represent. The Pride Nova Scotia network is composed of more than 160 public servants who identify as two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, and asexual, as well as their allies and their advocates. This year, Pride celebrates solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, friends and neighbors. This year, we're raising the Progress Pride flag with stripes which include the trans community and Black, Indigenous, and people of color to demonstrate that the 2S LGBTIQ+ community stands in solidarity to fight against any form of discrimination, harassment, and violence. The recent and the horrific murder of George Floyd is really only the latest example of how Black people have been harmed by racist systems. It has raised a call to action around the world that cannot be ignored. It is compelling us to examine our own unconscious biases, the microaggressions that we have learned to watch and say nothing about, and the privilege that we have, and to challenge ourselves around seeing through the eyes of others to understand how can we mitigate those biases? How can we see them and know them for what they are? And how can we use our privilege to change the way we are in this world? We all have to stop talking about this and examine our actions around it. The movement for Black civil rights and the 2S LGBTIQ+ movement, the Pride movement, has always exhibited intersectionality. These beautiful aspects of how we are is what we're celebrating, not only during Pride Month, but all year round. Today we raise the Pride flag to draw attention to the fact that we cannot let go of the tragic history of experiences that have paved the way for the awareness and the progress that has been made. But we do celebrate that progress, and we look ahead with hope that those lessons that have brought us to today are never, ever forgotten. I want to thank the Pride Network for organizing this event and committing your time and talents to this work, because I know it's done off the side of your desk. And I have to say that I am so honored and privileged to be here, not only as the head of the public service, but most importantly as your champion. I am inspired by you every single day, and I am fully committed to creating an environment where we can have an engaged and productive and fulfilled public service, one where everyone is accepted for who they are, where inclusion is part of our culture, and one where we serve Nova Scotians in all of their diversity. Meaningful action on diversity and inclusion and equity is a priority in our public service, and it has been a personal passion of mine to remove these barriers and enable this work for as long as I have the privilege to be here. I want to just take a moment about the leaders in the public service. We know that we must do our part to continuously demonstrate that this work is as much of a priority as anything else that is on our desks. It needs to be considered in everything we do. So I'm really excited that we have a brand new diversity and inclusion strategy. It's called All Together, and it is designed to take us to new levels of leadership, transparency, and accountability. With this strategy, senior leaders will demonstrate visible and active leadership on diversity and inclusion, and it will build it into departments' business and HR planning. They are compelled to set transparent goals, meaningful assessments of their progress, and reports on that progress. This will compel all of the leaders in our public service to stop talking and show action. Thank you. We are actively working to invite more diversity and senior leadership within government and to build the capacity of our current and future leaders in the areas of diversity and inclusion, including diverse hiring, creating inclusive and accessible workplaces, and showing our pride in everything we do. No matter where you are in government, I want to invite you in joining me in a conscious commitment to use whatever privilege you have to, no matter where you stand, to be with our neighbors and our community members, our 2S LGBTIQ+ community, standing by silently in your privilege as others experience discrimination because things don't directly affect you. It's not okay. Together we can be the change, and we can do big things, and we can make a difference. So happy Pride. I celebrate you today and every day. Be you. Be comfortable being you. Know that we value for being you. And know that you are already changing the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Langley. Before I welcome up Chris Cochrane, I just wanted to say, for those of you who are watching online, at home, who are part of the public service, join the Pride Network. Join as part of the community or as an ally. I also know there are those of you who are at home who are not part of government. Find a Pride group to join in your community and improve the lives of 2S LGBTIQ+ people. And don't forget that our community is intersectional, and that there are those in our community who sometimes don't see themselves. And in that interest, in talking to Halifax Pride, one of their themes this year is elevating voices. And for that reason, I brought in Chris Cochrane, local community trans activist and educator, to say a few words about an even brighter future for the province and for government.
Good afternoon, Premier McNeil, Minister Ince, Laura Lee, Ian, network employees, and viewers. My name is Chris Cochrane, but for the most 15 years, most people have known me as my stage name, El Noir. I'm a transgender Black woman, originally from Glace Bay, Nova Scotia, but I spent most of my adult life in Shabuktuk, the ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, but we mostly know as our Anglo-Saxon name, Halifax. We are also home to the earliest settlement of Black people stemming from the early 1600s, who came here as enslaved laborers, migrants, freedom seekers within Nova Scotia. With Nova Scotia's long history, we forget about the people who originated here before the colonization happened, which would lead to systemic racism in our history. I'm here to educate and to bring focus to our QT BIPOC community. For those who don't know, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. As a trans activist, I'm an educator As a trans activist and an educator, my voice must be used to shed light on those who are thrust into the darkness. This time last year, the world was celebrating 50 years of Stonewall, a fight against the 2S LGBT community and what we stand for, which, like most revolutions, started as a riot. Our trans, queer POCs were fed up with the injustice of our community, so they stood up to the police and said enough is enough. So here we are celebrating those actions. Fast forward 51 years later, and we are still fighting for those, just to be. We in Canada have a saying, at least we're not United States. But as sure as I'm standing here today, systemic racism within our police, within our government, within our residents is still very much alive. We have a sort of polite ignorance when it comes to Nova Scotia against homophobia and racism. Unfortunately, those marginalized groups, the silence is deafening to those communities. This is a time for lifting marginalized voices, to give our individual platforms and privilege, to lift those who do not have the space to do so. More than just posting a pride flag or a meme on your Facebook, education and understanding will help to shape better tomorrow for all of us. So as we celebrate Pride Month, remember the trans POC Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who started the revolution. Remember the enslaved migrants and immigrants of Black people who shaped and built this city. Remember the Mi'kmaq people who cultivated and are the true owners of this land. Remember those voices who made sure that we have a better future, but still today themselves don't have that. We as a society need to look inwards and ask, am I doing enough? Where can I help? How can I help? People of marginalized groups are putting into the work to abolish systematic racism and homophobia and transphobia. We need allies in our community to amplify that work. I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes from the late great Marsha P. Johnson. There is no pride for some of us without liberation for all of us. Thank you.
Now Chris will raise the flag for us here at Province House. Thank you so much for joining us online. We'll watch the flag go up and then we're done here. Thank you.